This is the risk assessment form, Form 3. It is probably the most, I guess in some cases, the most dreaded form, the most baned form. Uh, it's states on the top of it that this form is used for projects that involve hazardous chemicals, activities, devices, microorganisms that are exempt from pre-approval. But I mean, when you talk about hazardous activities or devices, especially activities, I mean, almost anything and everything that the students do might be considered hazardous or could be considered hazardous. The state is really finicky about this form. They almost want to see a risk assessment form on every project. We argue with them that okay, it's not required, it's not needed, but sometimes they can be really pretty persnickety about it. Just to go through the form, what it is: the student puts their name, title of their project, or again, of course, the question. Question one asks them to list all their hazardous chemicals. All right, so if they're using any chemicals other than water, let's consider those to be hazardous chemicals. Okay, they should list what the chemicals are. They should look up the MSDS sheets for all those chemicals and list all those MSDS in their bibliography. They can mention MSDS down below. They're doing dangerous, hazardous activities. Hazardous activities, shooting guns, shooting arrows, shooting off rockets. I mean, anything that could be dangerous, could be hazardous. That needs to be considered. Devices. Okay, so there's lots of hazardous devices, but some things that are overlooked are like power tools, drills, saws, stuff like that. These could be considered dangerous. 12 more than 12 volts. I mean, those have to be considered. Those should be listed and discussed in subsequent questions. Any microorganisms they're using that are exempt from pre-approval. So a lot of protozoans are exempt from pre-approval, so they should list those. And then number two, they should be identifying or assessing the risk involved in the project. So there are risks because they have hazardous chemicals, activities, devices, or microorganisms, and so those need to be listed there. Describe the safety precautions and procedures that they're going to use to reduce these risks, and if they're not sure, they probably should work with a qualified scientist or maybe a designated supervisor, or do some research online, especially stuff like MSDS forms and what have you for chemicals. Disposal procedures. Okay, so we get that they're not going to throw away a drill or a saw, and they're not throwing away their rockets, but they are going to probably dispose of chemicals, and they are going to dispose of microorganisms when they're done, and there's proper disposal techniques and procedures for those. So those need to be followed, and find out how they're supposed to dispose of those things and do it properly, and talk about how they're going to do it. Sources of safety information, again, as I mentioned, MSDS sheets, of course, for chemicals, and just whatever other safety information that's necessary there that follows it. There's going to be probably safety information for microorganisms that they can find online, so that should be there. The designated supervisor is usually the person who prints their name and signs it. The designated supervisor is usually the parent, but not necessarily. If a qualified scientist is overseeing the project, the qualified scientist was probably going to be the one that signs in this form. It should not be the teacher. It should be whoever is supervising that project, and maybe it is the teacher, but whoever is supervising that student is the one that's supposed to put their name and signature here, the date they reviewed it. And again, there's that line. I agree with the risk assessment, safety precautions, procedures, and I certify that I have reviewed the research plan. So again, all these forms need research plans with them for these people to sign off on these forms. Experience and training as it relates to the student's area of research. It's an important line. It's often left blank. It needs to be filled out. Did you have a discussion with a qualified scientist? Did you do some reviewing online? Did you read the MSDS forms? Whatever you've done, the designated supervisor has done to train themselves to be a safety person for this project. That should be mentioned there. And that is it.